Rain pounded against the towering glass windows of Ethan Wright's penthouse, streaking the view of the Chicago skyline. From the 40th floor, the city looked alive, pulsing with lights and movement. But to Ethan, it might as well have been a distant memory. The relentless storm outside mirrored the weight in his chest, the kind he had grown used to over the years. As the CEO of Wright Tech Industries, a billion-dollar tech empire, Ethan had everything a man could want: wealth, power, and a reputation that demanded respect. Yet in the stillness of his immaculate home, he felt none of it mattered. His penthouse, all sleek marble and polished steel, was cold and lifeless, much like the world he had built for himself. The rain drowned out the faint hum of the city below, leaving Ethan alone with his thoughts. The betrayal that had reshaped his life, the fiancé who had conspired with his best friend to nearly destroy his company, was years behind him. Still, its scars lingered, manifesting in the fortress he had built around himself, a barrier no one had breached since. Tonight was different. Ethan's restless mind couldn't settle, and the silence became unbearable. He grabbed his car keys, heading for the underground garage. Little did he know the storm outside was about to bring more than just rain. It would set into motion an encounter that would challenge the walls he had so carefully constructed. Ethan Wright gripped the steering wheel of his sleek black car as the rain lashed against the windshield, the rhythmic tapping an unrelenting reminder of the chaos outside. Driving through the near-desert streets of Chicago was his escape, a futile attempt to outrun the emptiness that seemed to follow him everywhere. Inside his penthouse, the cold precision of his surroundings mirrored his life. The marble countertops gleamed, untouched by clutter, and the leather furniture sat pristine, as if designed for show rather than use. Each detail of the space was perfect, just like his public image, yet it felt more like a museum exhibit than a home. For the outside world, Ethan was the ultimate success story, the visionary CEO of Wright Tech Industries, a company at the forefront of global tech innovation. His inventions had transformed industries, earning him accolades and a fortune that most people could only dream of. But Ethan wasn't living that dream. He hadn't allowed himself to trust anyone since the two people he cared for most, his former fiancée and best friend, had nearly ruined him. Their betrayal had been calculated, an effort to siphon money and tarnish his reputation. Although Ethan had outmaneuvered them and rebuilt his empire, the emotional cost was immeasurable. Every decision he made now was calculated, every interaction held at arm's length. If trust was a currency, Ethan had spent it all long ago, and the returns had left him broke in ways money couldn't fix. As the rain intensified, so did the storm inside him. Tonight, even the isolation of his penthouse felt suffocating. The city lights blurred in the rain-soaked streets, distant and out of reach, much like his connections with others. A flush of lightning illuminated an alleyway as he turned a corner, pulling him from his thoughts. A figure, hunched and unmoving, caught his eye. At first glance, it seemed like a discarded pile of rags, but as his headlights swept over it, Ethan realized it wasn't trash. It was a person. His grip on the wheel tightened. Something deep within him stirred, a mix of unease and curiosity. This moment, though he didn't yet know it, was the beginning of a story that would alter everything he believed about himself and the world around him. Ethan slowed his car, the headlights slicing through the downpour and illuminating the figure slumped against the brick wall of the alley. It was a young woman, knees drawn to her chest, her body trembling beneath an oversized hoodie that clung to her like a second skin. The rain had soaked her through, her hair plastered against her pale face. For a moment, Ethan sat frozen, his hands gripping the wheel. He wasn't the kind of person who stopped for strangers. After all, he had learned the hard way what trusting others could cost. But something about her, the way she hugged herself, her face hidden in her arms, gnawed at him. Against his better judgment, he killed the engine. The silence was quickly replaced by the sound of rain hammering against the roof of his car. Taking a deep breath, Ethan stepped into the storm. The cold rain hit him like a slap, soaking his hair and clothes within seconds. His shoes splashed through puddles as he approached the alley cautiously. "Hey," he called out, his voice firm but not unkind. The girl flinched, shrinking further into the shadows. Her shoulders tightened, and she didn't look up. "I'm not going to hurt you," Ethan added quickly, raising his hands in a gesture of peace. Slowly, she lifted her head. Her face was pale, strands of damp hair sticking to her cheeks, and her eyes, an arresting shade of green, met his with a mix of defiance and exhaustion. "I'm fine," she rasped, her voice rough from the cold. Ethan frowned. "You're clearly not fine." She straightened her back, her chin lifting ever so slightly. "I didn't break in or anything. I'm just trying to stay dry. I'll leave if you want me to." Ethan hesitated, his instincts telling him to walk away, to avoid getting involved. But the way her hands trembled as she spoke, the quiet dignity in her voice despite her obvious suffering, stopped him. "How long have you been out here?" he asked, his tone softening. She hesitated before answering. "Since this afternoon." Ethan exhaled slowly, his gaze sweeping over her soaked clothes and the way she shivered uncontrollably. "You can't stay out here, it's dangerous." The girl's eyes narrowed, suspicion flickering behind them. "Why do you care?" The question caught him off guard. Why did he care? He struggled to find an answer that even made sense to himself. Finally, he said, "Because I know what it's like to feel lost." Her eyes studied him for a moment longer, rain dripping from her lashes. Then, reluctantly, she gave a small nod. "Okay, just for a little while." Ethan led her toward the car, keeping a cautious distance. As she climbed into the passenger seat, she clutched her knees tightly, her guard still firmly in place. The drive back to the penthouse was silent, the tension between them palpable. When they arrived, Ethan ushered her through the private elevator that opened directly into his home. She paused in the doorway, her eyes darting around the sleek, minimalist space. "Bathroom's down the hall," he said, handing her a towel. "There's a robe you can use. I'll make you something warm to drink." The girl, Sophie, she eventually told him her name, nodded mutely and disappeared into the hallway. As the sound of running water echoed from the bathroom, Ethan stood in the kitchen, staring blankly at the tea kettle. He had no idea why he had brought a stranger into his home, but something about Sophie's quiet strength intrigued him. It wasn't pity, it was something deeper, something he wasn't ready to name. The quiet hum of the rain outside and the faint patter of water from the bathroom filled Ethan's penthouse, leaving him alone with his thoughts. He leaned against the kitchen island, staring at the untouched cup of tea he had prepared. What was he doing? Bringing a complete stranger, someone clearly down on their luck, into his home? It wasn't like him. When Sophie emerged, the sound of her footsteps drew Ethan's attention. She stood at the edge of the hallway, her damp hair falling softly around her face, and the oversized robe he had offered cinched tightly around her waist. She looked different, not just cleaner, but stronger, as though she had pieced herself together just enough to stand tall. "Feel better?" Ethan asked, his voice even. She nodded, her fingers clutching the edges of the robe. "Yes. Thank you, really." Ethan gestured toward the steaming cup of tea on the counter. "I made this for you." Sophie hesitated before stepping forward, wrapping her hands around the cup. The warmth seemed to soothe her, though she kept her gaze fixed downward. "Thank you again," she said softly, this time with more sincerity. They sat across from each other at the kitchen island, the silence between them heavy but not uncomfortable. Ethan couldn't help but steal glances at her. There was something in the way she carried herself, a quiet resilience that intrigued him. Finally, Sophie broke the silence. "I should go," she said quietly, already glancing toward the door. "You've done enough for me. I don't want to impose." Ethan blinked, caught off guard. He had expected her to cling to his offer of help, not to walk away from it. "You don't have anywhere to go, do you?" Her lips parted as though she wanted to argue, but no words came. Instead, her shoulders sagged, and she looked down at the floor. "No," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "Then stay," Ethan said firmly, though his tone softened as he added, "at least for tonight. It's not safe out there." Sophie's eyes flicked up to meet his, suspicion and vulnerability warring in her expression. "Why are you being so nice to me?" The question caught him off guard. Why was he helping her? The answer wasn't clear even to him. Finally, he shrugged and said, "Because I can." Over the next few days, Sophie settled into the guest room, and Ethan found himself growing increasingly curious about her. Slowly, she began to open up. One night, as they sat in the living room, Sophie stared at the rain-speckled windows and began to speak. "My mom was everything to me," she said quietly, her voice tinged with both affection and pain. "She worked so hard to give me a shot at a better life. When she got sick, I left college to take care of her. But no matter how much I worked, it wasn't enough. After she passed," Sophie trailed off, her hands tightening around her cup, "I lost everything." Ethan listened intently, his heart tightening at her words. "You never thought about asking for help?" Her bitter smile returned. "I did, but once you're down, it feels impossible to climb back up. People look at you differently. They don't see you, they see your failure." Ah, her words hit closer to home than Ethan cared to admit. He saw flashes of his own past. His own struggles to rebuild after betrayal had left him broken. Ethan began to leave books on the coffee table, business guides, novels, even a baking cookbook when Sophie mentioned her dream of opening a bakery. He kept it subtle, unsure of how much help she would accept. To his quiet satisfaction, he often found her reading late into the night, her expression softening as she lost herself in the pages. Still, Sophie remained guarded. Every time Ethan tried to encourage her to think about the future, her responses were brief, her reluctance to rely on him clear. Despite their growing connection, Ethan couldn't shake the fear of letting someone get too close. And though Sophie began to let her walls down, the cracks in their fragile trust were still visible shadows of past wounds lingering in both their hearts. The days passed with a quiet rhythm in Ethan's penthouse, the fragile trust between him and Sophie growing in small, cautious steps. She spent her evenings in the guest room or curled up on the couch with one of the books he'd left for her. Ethan, in turn, found himself increasingly drawn to her quiet resilience. But trust is a delicate thing, and old wounds have a way of resurfacing. It started one afternoon when Ethan was reviewing documents in his home office. From the hallway, he caught the soft murmur of Sophie's voice. The door to the guest room was slightly ajar, and though he wasn't trying to eavesdrop, certain words reached his ears. "Yes, I'm still here," Sophie whispered. "He doesn't know yet. I just need to figure out how to get access to the money. It's a large sum, enough to make things right." Ethan froze, the pen in his hand falling to the desk. The words echoed in his mind, dredging up memories he had tried to bury. His ex-fiancée's lies, the schemes of his former best friend. They all came rushing back. His pulse quickened as doubt took hold. Was Sophie planning to betray him too? When Sophie emerged from the guest room, she found Ethan standing in the doorway, his expression tense. "Who were you talking to?" he asked, his voice cold and clipped. Sophie blinked, taken aback. "It's personal." "Personal?" Ethan repeated, his tone laced with suspicion. It sounded more like financial. Her brows furrowed. "What are you talking about?" "I heard you," Ethan snapped, stepping closer. "Talking about a large sum of money. What does that mean? Were you waiting for the perfect moment to cash in? Was this," he gestured around the penthouse, his voice trembling with restrained anger, "all a setup?" Hurt flashed across Sophie's face, quickly replaced by indignation. "You think I'm using you?" she asked, her voice rising. "After everything I've told you? After everything we've shared?" "You're avoiding the question," Ethan countered, his walls now fully up, reinforced by years of mistrust. Her voice cracked as she responded. "I told you about my mother, about losing everything, and you still think I've been lying to you?" Ethan hesitated, his anger faltering for a moment, but the doubt lingered. "Prove me wrong," he said quietly. Sophie's hands trembled as she reached into her bag, pulling out a folded piece of paper. She thrust it toward him, her voice unsteady. "This is what you heard me talking about." Ethan snatched the paper and unfolded it. It was a letter from a small law firm, detailing a pending settlement from Sophie's mother's estate. His stomach dropped as he scanned the words. "I was calling the lawyer handling my mother's estate," Sophie explained, her voice barely above a whisper. "The settlement's been delayed for months. It's not much, but it's enough to start over. I was going to pay you back, Ethan, every cent, because I didn't want you to think I needed charity." Ethan felt the ground shift beneath him, guilt clawing at his chest. "Sophie, She shook her head, cutting him off. Tears welled in her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. "I trusted you, Ethan. I let you see parts of me I don't show anyone. And you saw me as a liar, just like everyone else." "Sophie, I'm sorry." Ethan tried again, his voice breaking. But she was already stepping back, grabbing her bag. "No," she said firmly. "You don't get to apologize and make this better. I opened up to you and you crushed that trust the moment things got hard." Ethan watched helplessly as Sophie moved toward the door, her shoulders stiff with anger and pain. "Sophie, wait," he pleaded. She paused, her hand on the doorknob, and looked back at him one last time. Her voice was quiet but firm. "I thought you were different, but I guess I was wrong." The door clicked shut behind her, leaving Ethan alone in the silence of his penthouse. He sank onto the couch, the weight of his actions crashing down on him. The echo of her words lingered, cutting deeper than he had expected. For the first time in years, Ethan felt the ache of true regret. The weeks that followed Sophie's departure were some of the longest of Ethan's life. The silence of his penthouse, once a refuge, now felt unbearable. Everywhere he looked, reminders of her lingered. The book she had left on the coffee table, the folded blanket on the couch where she used to sit. Ethan had tried to move on, burying himself in work, but the guilt gnawed at him. He had pushed away someone who had done nothing but trust him, someone who had opened up to him in ways no one else had in years. And now, she was gone. Late one evening, as Ethan sat in his office, scrolling through old messages, his assistant Carol called unexpectedly. "Sir, I think I found her," she said. Ethan's heart raced. "Where?" "St. Mark's Shelter," Carol replied. "She's been volunteering there in the evenings, helping women get back on their feet." For a moment, Ethan was speechless. Even after everything, Sophie was still helping others, doing what she could to make a difference. The next day, Ethan found himself standing outside the modest brick building of St. Mark's Shelter. The rain had returned, a light drizzle soaking the quiet neighborhood. Ethan hesitated, his sleek black car parked conspicuously on the street, the contrast between his world and Sophie's never more apparent. Inside, the scent of warm food and clean linens greeted him. Voices echoed softly from the common room, where a group of women were folding clothes and chatting. Then he saw her. Sophie sat cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by a few younger women. She was patiently explaining how to fill out job applications, her voice calm and encouraging. Her hair was tied back in a loose braid, and though her face looked tired, there was a quiet strength in her demeanor. For a moment, Ethan couldn't move. The woman before him was so much more than he had allowed himself to see. Ethan cleared his throat softly, and Sophie looked up. For a heartbeat, her expression froze, surprise flashing across her face, but it was quickly replaced by caution, the warmth she had once shown him now guarded. "Can we talk?" Ethan asked, his voice low. She studied him for a moment, then stood and gestured toward a quieter corner of the shelter. As they stood near a window, the rain tapping softly against the glass, Ethan searched for the right words. "Sophie," he began, his voice unsteady, "I was wrong." Her arms crossed over her chest, her gaze sharp but calm. "I know," she said simply. Ethan winced. Her quiet response hurt more than anger would have. "I let my past cloud my judgment," he admitted. "I doubted you, accused you of things you never did. I was scared of being hurt, of being vulnerable. But that's no excuse for how I treated you." Sophie's expression softened slightly, though her guard remained firmly in place. You didn't just doubt me, Ethan. You doubted who I am. I trusted you, and you saw me as someone who couldn't be trusted. Her words were a knife to his heart, but he nodded. You're right, he said, his voice thick with emotion. And I hate that I made you feel that way. You've been through so much, and yet you're here, helping others when you could be focusing on yourself. That's strength, Sophie. That's courage. And I see it now. I see you. Sophie's eyes shimmered, though she refused to let the tears fall. Words aren't enough, Ethan. If I can't trust you, there's no point in this conversation. Ethan swallowed hard, nodding. I know, I need to earn it back, but I'm asking for the chance to do that. For a long moment, Sophie said nothing. Then, slowly, her hand reached for his, tentative but real. I'm scared too, she whispered. Ethan brushed his thumb over her knuckles, his voice steady. Then we'll figure it out together. The sun broke through the clouds over the Haven Center, casting a warm golden glow on its newly painted sign. The modest building stood as a testament to resilience and second chances, a dream made real through the collaboration of Sophie and Ethan. For Sophie, the Haven Center was more than a shelter. It was a lifeline for women who, like her, had faced unimaginable loss and needed a chance to rebuild. For Ethan, it was an opportunity to give back, not just with his resources, but with his trust in Sophie's vision. Sophie stood by the entrance, her heart swelling with pride as the first women walked through the doors. Each face told a story of struggle, hope, and determination. Inside, the center was warm and inviting, with a shared kitchen, cozy rooms, and spaces for counseling and job training. Ethan approached quietly, watching Sophie from a distance. She was radiant, her confidence shining as she greeted the women with kindness and understanding. When she noticed him, her smile softened. We did this, she said, her voice filled with quiet gratitude. Ethan shook his head. No, you did this. I just followed your lead. Over the past few weeks, they had worked side by side to bring Sophie's vision to life. While Ethan handled the finances and logistics, Sophie had poured her heart into designing programs that would empower the women who came through the center. What's next? Ethan asked, stepping beside her as they watched the bustling activity inside. Sophie glanced at him, her eyes bright with determination. This is just the beginning. There's so much more we can do. Ethan smiled, a genuine warmth spreading through him. For the first time in years, he felt like he was part of something meaningful, something real. As the sun set over Chicago, the two stood together outside the Haven Center, their hands brushing briefly before Sophie reached out and took his hand. It was a simple gesture, but it spoke volumes about the trust they had rebuilt and the journey they had undertaken together. The pain of the past hadn't vanished, but it had shaped them, making them stronger and more willing to embrace the future. The story of Sophie and Ethan wasn't just about second chances. It was about the courage to trust, the power of compassion, and the belief that even the deepest wounds could heal. For Sophie, the center represented a fresh start, not only for herself, but for the countless women she would help. For Ethan, it was a reminder that wealth and success meant little without connection and purpose. Their story serves as a powerful reminder. Sometimes the people we least expect enter our lives to change us for the better. Trust can be rebuilt, compassion can transform, and together we can create something stronger than we ever imagined. If this heartfelt journey touched you, don't forget to like, comment, and share this video. For more inspiring stories about hope and resilience, subscribe to Emma's Stories. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time for another unforgettable story.